We're back, and you're tuned into the Labor Forum here on WRFG with Diane Mathewitz and Paul McLennan. And our two guests, who, again, if you're watching on our YouTube channel, you see these two wonderful young women who are seated here at the desk in the studio of WRFG. So I want to say hello to Jacqueline Delgadillo. Is that pronounced? Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for being here. And Ashley Rivas-Triana.
Hello.
All right, so both of you are activists with Freedom University.
Yes.
Now, people who are familiar with now what is a many-year struggle around the issue of undocumented students being able to get an education in this state, even though they have lived here oftentimes since they were babies and graduated from Georgia high schools, some with honors and presidents of their class and all the rest. May not be familiar either with Freedom University or with what this whole issue is, because the truth of the matter is, people don't get news anymore.
That's very true.
So I usually don't know what's going on, unless they listen to WRFG. And so if both of you, one or both of you, wouldn't mind first telling us a little bit about Freedom University, why it got started, what it is.
So Freedom University got started because of the bans placed against undocumented students, both 416 and 434, which are in-state tuition bans and a ban from admitting us to the top 5 public universities. And so it was sort of created in sort of like, I guess, strong inspiration from the civil rights movement back when the freedom schools started then.
Exactly.
And what we get there are college level classes, scholarship, and college application assistance, and a lot of leadership development skills. So, you know, it's a place where students can go, and even though we're not in school yet, we can still continue to learn thanks to the professors who volunteer their time. So
I have met so many young activists, young incredible leaders who have been part of Freedom University, and of course the professors who started out at the University of Georgia with this idea, who have given a lot of time and energy in developing this and taking many of you on tour all across the country, where Freedom University in some respects is maybe even better known in some parts of the country than right here. So Ashley, how did you get involved with Freedom University?
I became involved right out of high school. I graduated in 2012, and at that time I knew about my legal status and how it affected me from going to college, but I didn't really know any alternatives. Then I found Freedom University on Facebook. Actually, Facebook is a wonderful tool, and I was able to become more involved. I went to the first class, which was still in Athens at the time, where it was started, and that's how I became involved. At the beginning, I wasn't really involved with the activism side of it, just because I was kind of just testing the waters, I guess. But having been involved with it for such a long time now, I've become a lot more, I guess, invested in the movement.
All right, so let's back up a little bit,
Right.
because in about 2011 there was just the most vicious anti-immigrant legislation, hysteria, rhetoric, demagogy, we could all use all these words.
Right.
They didn't just sweep Georgia, it was across the country, Arizona, there were just so many places where, really comparable to what Paul talked about in the early years when there actually was a federal law that
Right.
didn't allow Chinese people, specifically because of their ethnicity, nationality, to emigrate into the United States at all. And also, as he mentioned, there actually even was a policy or position that the labor movement was taking to actually keep encouraging the division, to not allow certain people to be in a union. So in 2011, the Georgia legislature passed a series of really bad pieces of legislation, many of which got challenged in court and never really made the light of day. But one did impact undocumented students and their ability to go to universities. And then the Board of Regents, which people should know is an unelected group of mostly, I don't know any of them. They're not anybody that I know. They're usually
Yeah.
high-position corporate leaders
Right. Let's
who
just say
don't
they're
know
not really-
anything about education
Yeah,
anyway.
not really representative of the population, let's say that.
Anyhow, so they passed these two policies that you mentioned. Now, could you explain a little bit better what it means not to be able to even apply to the five top colleges, and the financial impact of what it means to have to pay out-of-state tuition?
Right, so the policies that you're talking about are policy 416, which is the admissions ban that doesn't allow us to even apply to the top 5 colleges. And I mean, just in itself that you're not even, I guess, taken into consideration, your applications aren't even looked at, is just crazy, because students that are totally academically qualified, have all the, meet all the qualifications, aren't even looked at. And then the other policy, 434, is the in-state tuition bill, which is basically a financial ban for every institution and throughout the state.
And people should understand, if you've got any figures, the difference between what it costs if you get in-state tuition, which frankly, tuition is going up. Most people are having a hard time
Right.
meeting in-state tuition.
Very true.
But what does it mean if you have to pay out-of-state tuition? How many times greater is it?
It's oftentimes 3 to 4 times greater than in-state tuition. And you know, even if a lot of undocumented students have opted for going to community colleges, and they have to pay per credit, so it's not really, they're not really up to date as their classmates are. And a lot of them, to be able to afford that, they have to work 2 to 3 jobs. So again, you're not able to focus on your academics, and a lot of them have to end up taking a break or dropping out. So it takes a lot of toll on undocumented students, both economically and I would say mentally and everything.
I was wondering about the parallels, mentioning the civil rights movement. Why is this similar in terms of an issue of segregation? And what does the inspiration of the civil rights movement mean for you?
Well, I think it's really important to note that the same 5 colleges that currently ban undocumented students from applying to the institutions are the same 5 that banned black students in the 1950s and 60s. So we see this, I guess, racial segregation. They claim it's not racial anymore, but this exclusion, for certain minority groups continue to happen. So we see those parallels. And right now, although it's not racialized, they try to make it criminalized, but we see the same things happening.
Well, I want to follow up on this as well. The ban. So it doesn't matter if you are an A+ student, won every award at your high school, been here since you were 2 days old, totally grew up in the United States, maybe even didn't realize until you were 16 that there was something about your status that was going to prevent you from going to school. And so there is absolutely nothing that would prevent you from going to one of these 5 schools and excelling, except for the fact that under current immigration law, there's no way for you to get papers. But let's talk about DACA. All right, so how does the DACA, which is this Obama administration kind of free pass for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you to be here without fear of deportation, gives you the right to work, gives you the ability to get a driver's license.
Right.
So you have those things. Are both of you DACA
Yeah,
students?
we
Both DACA students. Yet, the university system says you still can't go to school.
Yeah, it doesn't really make any sense, and it sort of creates this, working class within our community, to where we can't go to low wage jobs and drive, but we still can't receive an education to better ourselves, and we still can't vote to change those laws. So it definitely isn't a solution. It's just a temporary thing for sure, and you know, we've talked about it amongst ourselves, undocumented students, and it is a good thing, but it's definitely not, you know, a long-term thing. So.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely see its benefits, like you said. It allows us to work legally, allows us to be able to have driver's licenses, but like Jacqueline mentioned, it's just a temporary solution, and because we're able to drive to these low-wage jobs and you know, I guess pay taxes into the system but not receive any of the benefits, it's really just, like I said, we're revisiting history, because that was the same sort of policies that were set up during Jim Crow era.
All right, so I want another question now. So the Hope Scholarship. The Hope Scholarship, the way it's set up now, the student that's the top student in a class is supposed to be able to get the Hope Scholarship.
Right.
But even you, with your DACA status,
Right.
can't get this money
Right.
either. And I am also aware that you can't apply for any federal scholarship or loans as well.
No.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about, it's just so crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, can you talk about some of the Freedom University students who have gotten full scholarships at prestigious schools all over the United States because they recognize the both leadership ability and academic superiority of some of the students that have gone through Freedom University, and what that means, kind of an argument or a way that you're approaching these legislators or the Board of Regents about how this is really a decision on their part, which turns up to hurt the
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Georgia economy and Georgia communities.
For
Can you talk
sure.
about that a little bit?
Yeah, we've had a pretty good amount of undocumented students at Freedom University who've gone off to out-of-state institutions because, like you mentioned, they're perfectly qualified to. And it is unfortunate that they have to seek higher education elsewhere that's not the state of Georgia, because it does take an economic toll on the state of Georgia, just for the simple fact that, you know, we are allowed to get a K through 12 education, and, you know, taxpayers do pay that. So when we're denied access to higher education, it's sort of like, where does that money go, you know? Why were we invested in to begin with? And also, our parents pay taxes as well, and we receive little to no benefits. So, you know, it's really a question of, you know, higher education should be more so a right if you're qualified for it, more so, you know, on the status of merit, not so on, you know, citizenship status, because like you mentioned, we have been here, a lot of us, since we were young, and been contributing to the state, so.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's important to note that because, you know, these students have shown that they have the academic merit to get into Ivy League colleges. You know, we have students who are in Ivy Leagues right now, and the state of Georgia, by continuing to uphold these policies, they're just basically saying that, you know, qualified students don't really matter to them, because if they chose to keep those students here, they could go through the higher education system, become, you know, contributing members, you know, have, I guess, better careers, better, you know, be in better tax brackets, and that actually goes back to the state. And that's kind of like what they haven't realized yet. They haven't realized the negative effects that the state of Georgia will have by continuing to deny students their education.
I want to talk a little bit about the unbelievably well-planned, coordinated activity that you, members of Freedom University, and others, supporters, allies, even from other parts of the country,
Right.
came here to Georgia on February 1st, which was Monday, and you carried out, I thought, very bold and creative actions. So I know you were part of them, so let's talk about what happened at the University of Georgia in Athens, at the campus of Georgia State, and at Georgia Tech. All on Monday, February 1st. And first explain why Monday, February 1st.
Right, well, Monday, February 1st was actually chosen to commemorate the 56th anniversary of the Greensboro sit-ins that happened in 1960. we wanted to continue that really bold legacy of student resistance and kind of do it in their honor. It also coincided with a very important Supreme Court case decision that happened here, but that was, just happened. But that's really why we chose that date. And we were both at the Georgia State location, so we can talk about, what happened there and our experience there.
Yeah, so it was a really powerful action, and it was, it went totally unexpected, like a lot of things do. So it was an action planned for Monday, but it did prolong onto Tuesday. And yeah, like you said, a lot of students from out of state came, from the Northeast came and supported us, and many of them got arrested with undocumented students to stand in solidarity with us. And I know at the University of Georgia in Athens that protest was sort of not short, but it wasn't prolonged until the next day. So they pretty much did the same thing. They did an integrated classroom for undocumented and documented students.
Explain that, because an integrated classroom,
Right.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
So ever since the policies that we mentioned went into effect, it means that undocumented students have been basically kept out of the top 5 public universities in the state. So what we wanted to do is kind of bring those students back into the classroom alongside documented student allies, and so integrating the classrooms once again. So that's what we did at the 3 universities. We had integrated classrooms at each of the campuses. And we
Like
we
a teach-in?
Yeah, just like a teach-in. We had guest lecturers come in to each of the campuses. We had 2 lecturers at our campus, and really just did what literally the law says that we can't do: learn within this institution. And it's kind of crazy how, students wanting to get an education, that's kind of basis for getting arrested. Ultimately, police officers had to literally remove us from these classrooms. And it's just crazy how that's kind of like radical and political that students want to get an education.
Now, I know one of the demands was that the presidents of these 3 institutions in particular take a stand. In other words, that they publicly refute the decision that's made by the Board of Regents.
Yeah.
And so the Georgia State, we'll call it an occupation, was in Centennial Hall. For those who don't know, that is the exact building that President Mark Becker has his office high up.
Right.
So there you all were in the lobby until early morning.
Right. Yeah.
From Monday till early Tuesday morning.
Yeah. We actually began our protest at 3 in the afternoon on Monday, and it didn't end until students were forcibly removed at about 5:30 in the morning on Tuesday.
Now, so did you ever get an opportunity to present anything to President Becker at Georgia State or the presidents at either UGA or Tech?
Not personally, because at the time that we were, holding our protests, they actually weren't. President Becker was not there at that time, and I think it was, very. I guess the police wanted to expedite, removing us from the building before he got there the next morning. So we actually didn't have, a personal conversation with him, but we did make it very clear that we would like him to come out and speak about these policies, which, if he will, if he won't. A lot of we've gotten some presidents to kind of say, oh, we can't really say anything, it's not our call, it's the Board of Regents' call. So we kind of want to urge them to stop hiding behind the Board of Regents and just you as a person, how do you feel about
And
this?
I think it's also very powerful just in itself to look at how many Georgia State University students were with us. And that says a lot about how they view the bans. They're not in agreement with them either. And they also feel like they're being excluded from learning with peers that they went to high school with and graduated with. That in itself is telling the university, we're not in agreement with it, and we stand in solidarity with undocumented students.
All right, so you mentioned this court decision, and Freedom University was not per se a part of this legal action, but many other undocumented students were filing suit against the Board of Regents over this decision, and it has to do with this terminology of DACA,
Yeah.
which has you legally present in the United States, and the Board of Regents declaring that legally present doesn't mean you're lawful.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's this kind of semantical nonsense
Yeah, definitely.
to cover up a really racist, backward policy,
Definitely.
in my view. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of this court ruling not on the DACA language, not on the language of the legislation, but simply that the Board of Regents, because they're this state entity, are above and beyond any legal
Right,
action.
yeah.
They are sacrosanct, they're not elected, they're appointed, they're wealthy, and nobody can touch them,
Yeah.
as a group.
Yeah.
That's as a group. So what is it that you understand is happening next with this lawsuit? And how much value, let me ask you that, how much value did you place on it as opposed to the kind of activities that you did? Or do you see them as all good things happening?
Sure. Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's very important to do both kinds of, activism. Other undocumented students have taken to do more so legislative lobbying kind, and, doing lawsuits, and I think that's very effective. And we do more so the activist kind of side of it. While they're talking to a lot of politicians and legislators, we are trying to talk to the people and the residents of Georgia. And I think, attacking this issue from both sides is very powerful and very necessary.
Definitely, yeah. They both have their place in our movement, and I think as long as we keep both of them going, we will eventually see change. But as you were saying, I think it's crazy how ultimately the Supreme Court ruled that the Board of Regents is just like untouchable. It's crazy.
All right. Do you have a question,
Yeah,
Paul? Great.
The parallels with the civil rights movement are so powerful, and from what I understand about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Ella Baker and the importance of the Freedom School in developing leaders and empowering people, could you say a little bit about what the difference is between a Freedom School and a regular school and how it's part of the overall movement?
Good question.
Yeah. So I know that there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it, but talking about freedom schools, how they were basically created for people to survive in a society that's out to get them. And I think that's the difference between a regular public school and our school and like the model of freedom schools. How you're really taught this kind of education that's more based on survival, and it's informed by survival. It's informed by our own personal experiences as undocumented students, and we use that as to inform our education and inform our own identities, and that's kind of more of what we learn rather than we don't have math classes, we don't have science classes, although those are very important and critical to education. I think we can take a lot more away when we kind of base our education on like our own lived experiences.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think also something I noticed, I was in Freedom University when I was still a senior in high school, and going to Freedom University classes and to regular high school classes was very different. I was taught things that I wasn't taught in my regular high school classes, and I learned a lot about my own background and my own history, something that was never even mentioned in my high school classes, so it is very empowering.
Well, I think the whole idea of people's history is one of the reasons we do this week in labor history.
Right.
Because one, we think that every struggle of all people who work and who are oppressed and exploited is part of our collective history. But absolutely, most textbooks in school don't, if they have one page on a union, or if they certainly never mention the struggles of indigenous people as resistance against colonialism.
Exactly.
They certainly don't talk about slave revolts as revolts against oppression
Right.
and exploitation.
Yeah.
And they don't talk about worker strikes
Yeah.
as being for the right to have a safe job, the right to get a
Right.
living wage, the right to be respected.
Right.
So these things are just missing.
Yeah,
from
definitely.
our-
History is usually always taught from the side of the conquerors or the conquistadors, or the people who came in and colonized. But that's what we're trying to do. And this semester, actually, we're doing a American history course using A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn as our textbook.
And you all know that Howard Zinn was at Spelman College.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And got
definitely.
fired.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
And I really hope that we have you back, and I hope our listeners can really appreciate the incredible strength of these two women here, and the role that they're playing in really developing and creating history right this very moment. So real quick, if there's somebody out there who wants to know more about Freedom University, wants to be engaged in supporting this struggle, how do they do it?
Well, you can feel free to visit our website, which is freedomuniversitygeorgia.com, and we are also very active on Facebook, which is Freedom U Georgia, and then that we update almost every day, very regularly. We have a lot of pictures and how you can become involved if you would like to.
Thank you again. So
Thank you
folks,
very
you all were just listening to Jacqueline Delgadillo and Ashley Rivas-Triana, and you have a very active sister.
Oh, yes.
And so folks, before we go, I want to make sure everyone is aware that the last week we had Verdelia Turner on, president of the American Federation of Teachers here, and tomorrow, starting at 9 o'clock, there is a multi-hour program. It's about the whole question of education here in Georgia and the attempt by the governor and charter school management companies to essentially take over the school system, the public school system, and take the money. So there's an event called A Summit to Reclaim the Promise of High-Quality Public Schools, Debunking the Hype of the Opportunity School District. And it is tomorrow morning starting at 9, going until 1 o'clock. Coverdale Legislative Office Building, that's 18 Capitol Square, room 506. This is open to the public. There'll be a lot to learn there. Again, thank you both so very much.
Thank you for
And,
having us.
we will be back again next Monday. Please tune in and tell your friends that this is the place to hear good news.